Hello and welcome to Creepy Police Ghost Stories. In all honesty, when I started working on this week's video, I had every plan to make it about a different topic completely, but sadly found this was impossible. Originally I was going to talk about stories of ghost police, but really couldn't find anything outside of urban legends. So this led me down the path of making the sequel to Paranormal Police Reports, which was a video I created about a year ago. With my first entry, many of you asked if, being as how these sightings were being mentioned by police officers, if it was meant to be more credible. The answer to that question is yes and no. Police officers are normal people and could be prone to misidentifications or seeing things due to stressful situations, much like you and I. It also can't be ruled out that some could make sightings up just for the sake of hoping to gain fame from them. The reason I do say that they are more reliable is sadly due to the almost career suicide many professionals face when going public with something that isn't deemed socially acceptable. Many times these officers feared persecution or the loss of their jobs when coming forward with these reports. So this only can mean that what they saw was important enough to risk it all. With that said, many of these stories omit names and exact locations. Normally, I am skeptical of reports that leave out this critical information, but due to the risks involved with relaying the encounters, I can give it a pass. So let's get into a few stories that have been reported by the men and women in blue. Our first story finds us by way of a security guard that worked in a hospital. The guard frequently was called in for things that were a little bit odd, but normally could be written off due to seeing things due to stress or flat out misidentifications. However, one night he received a call about something that was a bit more unordinary. An old man who was being treated at the hospital was nearing the end of his life, but continually stated that he wasn't going to die in the hospital. Late one night, the nurses who were watching the cameras located in the patient's room saw him slide open the curtain around his bed, stand up, and walk out of his room towards the elevator at the end of the hall. The nurses called in an alert of a patient trying to escape, and employees stood guard over exit locations as well as the elevators in an attempt to apprehend the old man. The thing is that he never left the elevator, nor was he seen trying to get out of any of the exit doors. The security guard was brought in to help search for the ailing patient. After searching for a while, the old man couldn't be found, so the guard returned to the ICU floor that the patient had escaped from. Once there, the head nurse informed him that at least 3 people saw the old man leave, but at the same time, all his life support alarms had gone off, and he had died at that very moment. This meant that the old man had never left his room at all, but allegedly his ghost did. Apparently the guard requested to see the camera footage, but was barred by the bosses of the hospital. All that was said was that the nurse who had sounded the escape patient alarm had done the right thing, and that some things just could not be explained. I want to step back for a moment and mention one of my issues with this story, and that is security cameras in patients' rooms. I thought this was odd due to privacy laws, but after a bit of research, I did find that some hospitals do in fact have cameras in the rooms. Normally, they are only pointed at the bed and don't have audio capability. Moving on, we go to a couple stories that are somewhat related due to their subject matter. One night at 3 o'clock while patrolling a country road, Officer TJ Riggs got the urge to relieve himself. Knowing the nearest restroom was about half an hour away, he decided to pull off on a dark gravel road to fix his problem. All of a sudden, TJ couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, and looked up to see a dark figure standing on the road about 20 feet from the rear of his car. Officer Riggs zipped up and started to try to talk to the being, assuming it was a property owner unhappy with someone being on his property. The shadowy figure didn't respond to any of the communication. Feeling a bit threatened with the lack of response, the officer demanded the figure to show its hands and identify itself. It was at this point that TJ pulled up his flashlight and shockingly saw the being disappear when the light neared it. Officer Riggs quickly decided to get back into his car, only to look into his side mirror and to see the figure had returned and was steadily walking towards him. Fearing that bullets would be of no use against this particular situation, TJ sped off quite terrified of what had just developed. In a similar situation, a sergeant by the name of Paul Jacobs was working night shift in a submarine when he had a strange encounter with an unexpected guest. One night, Paul was taking a break in his office. Suddenly he heard the sound of footsteps emanating from the hallway nearby. When he turned around, he claimed to see a shadow person just standing in the doorway. Sergeant Jacobs claimed it was as if the being was simply stopping by to say hello. As he watched the figure, it turned and walked into an adjoining office, only to vanish. Paul was adamant that this figure wasn't something that was seen out of the corner of his eye. It was something that was right in front of him and stayed there for at least 20 seconds before moving on. According to the report, co-workers who learned of the encounter stated they have seen similar things and usually prefer not to stay in the sub at night. As it goes, he still claims to be a skeptic, but can't quite explain the encounter he had. Now we find a story that is a bit more up my alley of interests. Officer Arthur Rigsby was alerted that at the local graveyard there was a recent rash of tombstones being knocked over. Due to this, the chief had requested that all units spend their spare time while on patrol, keeping an eye on the cemetery in order to try to catch who was committing the crime. Arthur frequently stopped by at the beginning of his shift and at the end every night. He would sit in a location about a block away and watch over the property using binoculars. According to him, the cemetery was well lit with streetlights. One night, he claimed to see a cat-like being walking among the headstones on its hind legs. Officer Rigsby quickly went to check it out, but could find nothing. He did state that he saw a trail in the dew on the grass, and it stopped at one particular grave marker. It also is worth noting that Arthur stated he was an avid hunter and knew all of the animals that frequented the area, but this one was new to him. I love seeing cryptid police reports, but I am curious if the headstone the footprints ended at was possibly significant. On a side note, I'm not familiar with spirit werewolves. Our final report tells a tale of a spirit that seems to be forever damned to be locked up in a cell. Officer Marco Castillo was a public servant who had been called out for numerous types of odd calls in his career, such as hauntings as well as UFO encounters. But one night the activity hit close to home. Officer Castillo was booking an individual who he had previously picked up for domestic violence when he noticed a man standing in cell number 1. He described him as having short hair, glasses, and having a white shirt on. Not thinking much about it, he continued the booking process and avoided eye contact with the prisoner, not wanting to have to deal with any of his requests. Once done, he escorted a new prisoner to his cell, which required walking by cell 1. The prisoner inside was still standing by the bars, but didn't say a word. Later in the day, the police sergeant asked Officer Castillo to check the inmate paperwork to see if any of them were due to be transported to the county jail. While doing a head count, he noticed that cell number 1, that was previously occupied, was now empty. Marco panicked, thinking that the prisoner had escaped, and immediately asked his sergeant if any of the inmates had been moved. After a few calls, it was found that no one should have left their cells that night. Marco went back to the paperwork and saw that no one had been placed in cell number 1. Being quite confused, the officer and the sergeant reviewed the booking surveillance video, and on it did see the man in the white shirt. However, when the footage showed Officer Castillo walking by the cell with the previous prisoner, they were shocked to see the man vanish into thin air. Sadly, if not oddly enough, when they tried to transfer the video to DVD and a USB stick, the man in the white shirt was nowhere to be found in the recording. Officer Castillo claims that to this day he frequently sees inmates in the nearby detox tank talking to someone inside cell 1, even though nobody is there. Before ending this video, I wanted to thank all of you for your continued support and understanding of my channel's recent spotty upload schedule. This really bothers me that I have been having to release videos basically every other week. This one was a bit longer, due to my work schedule. I can't seem to apologize enough for this, and it is something that I constantly think about during the week. Just so it is said, no matter what happens or what changes YouTube makes, I will continue to make content. I'm making this statement so if you don't see me post anything every week, that you know I'm just tired out from work and not because I'm quitting YouTube. Now, if a month goes by without me posting, then maybe there's reason for concern. If you haven't already done so, please consider subscribing to my channel for content similar to this. Also, I'd greatly appreciate it if you could share my channel with someone who may be interested in this type of genre of videos. With that, be safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Later.